We got some news today from Sony. Mark Cerny, the lead architect of the PlayStation 5, has now announced the price and some of the specifications, not all, but most of the major changes and specifications for the PS5 Pro. And we'll kind of look at, yo, how you doing, Antoine? What's up, man? We're going to look at what it is and who it's for, if it's for anyone, question mark. So I want to preface this by saying I don't have a PlayStation 5. I already thought that the PlayStation 5 was bad value for what it costed originally. I think that the $500 for the box you're buying wasn't amazing. It was a great value if you had no other computing device that could also play video games. But if you already had some other computing device that could play video games, whether that be a 2018 or 2017 computer or newer, you are fine. You're totally okay. I don't think you really need a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series S or X. If your latest computing device was a PS4 or an Xbox One or a computer thereof in strength or older, you probably want to get yourself into a newer generation of hardware, whether that be a newer gaming PC around the same price as something like a PS5. Or now we have a new benchmark to go for, $700, which we'll get into for the PS5 Pro, or at an equivalently priced PC, right? There's a few weird non-changes about the PS5 that I think is very strange, but we'll go ahead and open the thing I have here, and we'll just take a look at it. Live screen is bright. I wish Tom's Hardware had a dark mode. That'd be sick. So, PS5 Pro confirmed. New PS5 will cost $699 on November 5th with larger GPU and PSSR upscaling. First thing I can tell you is larger GPU. That means better graphics performance. That's the first thing there. Better graphics performance, higher yields when it comes to gaming at 1440p, 1080p, and 4K. Larger GPU also means more power required, usually, and more heat. So surely they have a better cooling system because it's not mentioned. But surely they have a better cooling system. PSSR upscaling, as you can see from the last word there, it's a new form of upscaling called PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, built kind of similarly to something like deep learning super sampling from NVIDIA or Fidelity Super Resolution from AMD. For anyone who knows what we're listening to right now, or doesn't know what we're listening to right now, this is Ratchet & Clank music. We're going to be listening to this the whole time, because PlayStation. The PS5 Pro has long been rumored, but Sony started teasing it as PlayStation celebrated its 30th anniversary. As expected, the PS5 Pro features a redesigned chassis and omits the optical drive. Yikes. But more importantly, to hardware enthusiasts, it's getting a bigger upgrade in the GPU department along with improvements to the memory subsystem. Here's a breakdown of what's changing. We don't really need to look at a lot of this. Because a lot of these things, this right here, this part of the article doesn't really matter. We can just look at the hard line specs and numbers, and I think that's probably the better idea anyway. Why is my chat box not working? Is my frame in the wrong spot? No, it's kind of right. Let's move the frame down. There we go. Someone's a little off about that. Anyways, we can just look at the hardline specs, right? So what we're looking at here is the PS5 Pro versus the PS5 Slim and PS5. There's no difference, by the way. Just want to let you guys know. There's no difference, real differences, between the PS5 and the PS5 Slim. The only real difference between the PS5 and the PS5 Slim is the hard drive. The PS5 Slim has 1 terabyte, while the PS5 only had 825. Main difference. Then, if we look at the CPU, exactly the same. Zen 2, that means Ryzen 3000 or 4000 series, for anyone who doesn't know. 8 cores. So if we're looking at an 8-core Zen 2 processor, you just type this shit into Google, and there you go. Boom, you'll get the Ryzen 7 3700X. Some people also think that it's maybe closer to something like a Ryzen 7 4700G. Okay, fair enough, right? Agreed that it's not a Zen 3, not a Zen 4, not a Zen 5, which means that the CPU performance of the new PS5, since it's probably Zen 2, and they didn't mention anything about CPU uplift, the CPU is probably the same. And when you think about the fact that the PS5 is getting a big GPU uplift, but not a CPU uplift, that means either they are they're very steadfast and they have conviction that the CPU will last inside of the PS5, or they figured if they upgraded the CPU as well, it would cost too much. Because we definitely have newer CPU hardware on the horizon, right? And we already have newer CPUs that have come out since Zen 2. Zen 2 is from like 2018, 2019. It's already kind of old. It might even be older than that. It's probably 2018. It's old hardware. Very old hardware. Ryzen 7 3000 series. We're currently on the 8000 series, about to be, right? We're on the 8000 series desktop. That's 5 generations old. Then if we look at the manufacturing, it's TSMC N7. It says unknown for the PS5 Pro, so unfortunately we don't have much of an idea. But we do know this, that there is 24 more CUs for the GPU with a theoretical clock speed of roughly 17 teraflops in comparison to 10 teraflops. 10.28. We'll give it the extra 28, the 0.28. 10.28 in the PS5 base and slim. People are assuming that it's RDNA 3.5 or RDNA 3 because of the fact that they said the ray tracing uplift is so big. I'm assuming that it's RDNA 3, right? That it's maybe something along the lines of an RX 7000 series card, which would make sense because that would mean that instead of Radeon giving out their technology early for the PS5 and kind of subsidizing the cost of continuing to develop it for RDNA 4, they're just giving them RDNA 3, and maybe Sony doesn't realize or doesn't know that RDNA 3 just has that better of ray tracing performance, which it does. RDNA 3's ray tracing performance in comparison to RDNA and RDNA 2 is pretty big. I don't know about a 45% bigger, but it's something around per tier about 15 to 25% bigger. So depending on these numbers, marginally it could change. We also don't know if they bring it up with their super resolution. The memory interface. The PS5 Slim, and the PS5 Pro all have 16 gigabytes of RAM, GDDR6, which is faster than the native RAM inside of a computer, right? We're currently on double data rate 5, DDR5 for graphics for desktops, for desktop RAM. But when it comes to graphics RAM, we are on GDDR6. We also have GDDR6X for some graphics cards that are very powerful, very power hungry, and have very good cooling systems, right? 14 gigabits per second was the originals, and now we're at 18 gigabits per second for a faster memory bus. And that interface, the memory interface, stays the same though at 256, which is a really good memory phase. There's nothing wrong with the 256, a 56 gigabyte memory, 256-bit memory interface. The memory bandwidth has also gone up from 448 to 576. That is pretty good. That is a nice uplift. That's going to mean that because of the fact that the RAM is significantly faster and has easier time being accessed for the GPU will be less likely to be bottlenecked by the RAM. But that says nothing of if the CPU will still bottleneck the GPU, which is what I'm very much afraid of, and we'll get into that in a second. Storage, moving up to 2 terabytes. So, for the GPU upgrade and for the Wi-Fi and storage upgrade, you're paying an additional $200. You're also losing access to the Blu-ray optical drive because other optical drive is sold separately. You no longer have an optical drive. Power is unknown. Now, if we have a larger CPU and we have more CUs, even if it's all the way up to RDNA 3, which has better power efficiency, right? A better power envelope, I still think we'll probably see somewhat of a power supply change, because this is a big increase for the memory interface, for the bandwidth, and for the memory subsystem of 18 gigabytes per second, right? And you're going up in CUs as well. So I'm assuming that we'll probably go up to something like a 400 to 450 watt power supply, which is getting dangerously close to like a low-end PC, right? Low-end PCs can use a 500, 550 watt PSU. So, I mean, we're getting ever closer. We're getting ever closer to PS5s and Xboxes, or PlayStations and Xboxes just being computers. They're very close to x86 hardware, which I think is good. So I want to show you guys my guess on the GPU that is powering the PS5, or something that is pretty close to, right? If we just look at raw rasterization, teraflops, memory bandwidth, interface and the subsystem itself, I think that it's the Radeon RX 6800 XT, but kind of warped and molded into an RDNA 3 variant. And the reason why I say that is because we look at this graphics card, and the only thing we could say that might be it, but I think that this is a little too powerful. I'll show you guys the next thing. This graphics card is significantly stronger than the next thing above it, and it's at 20.74 teraflops. So might be a little too high, but they could reel in those base clocks, and they could reel in the base and the boost clock. As you see here, the memory clock and the memory bandwidth, or the memory clock is only 16 gigabytes instead of it being 18. But it has a 256 memory bus, and the bandwidth is 512. That is extremely close to this 576. Extremely close. So I believe that they've warped or molded either a Radeon RX 7800 XT or non-XT, or an RX 7700 XT into something with the power envelope or scope of a Radeon 6800 or 6800 XT. That's my guess. If we look at something like the Radeon 7700 XT, which is not as close, if I'm honest, it's not as close because of the bus width. It's not as close because of the bus width. But if we look here, if we look at the teraflops, it's got more teraflops. It's got a lower bandwidth and a lower memory bus. It has 18 gigabytes. The memory clock is 18 gigabytes. So this is closer, right? So the only other thing I can think is something like, it's in between. It's in between these two graphics cards, and this is RDNA 3. And if we look here, now we're at 37 teraflops, too high, a 624 gigabyte bandwidth, 19.5 on the clock speed for the RAM. Too high. Somewhere in there, it's in between this power envelope of something like an RX 7700 XT and an RX 7800 XT. My guess is right there, smack dab in the middle, at the RX 6700 XT, but molded to be a RDNA 3, possibly, graphics card. That's my guess. But with that being said, it seems we don't think or know anything about a CPU upgrade. Which means, if we go to something like PC bottleneck calculator, we can see if we think that an Ryzen 7, an R7, sure, I could say R7, a Ryzen 7 3700X would bottleneck something along the lines of a 6800 XT. Right, we'll use the 6800 XT. It's probably the best thing to do. So let's go RX 6800 XT. We'll use this one, and I mean I'm sure that it's targeting at least a base 1440p. We could say that it's targeting 4K. But I feel like that's probably wrong, right? Because they're talking about upscaling and super resolutions, which I'll get into in a second because that's something I haven't discussed. I'm only talking about hardware. I prefer the RX-7. That's a car. That's a good car too. All right, let's take a look. So the calculated result is that the Ryzen 7 3700X is actually too weak for something along the lines of an AMD RX 6800 XT at 1440p. It's too weak. But Sony did not change, or as far as we know, did not change anything about the CPU interface on the PS5. Did they just create the ultimate bottleneck experience for $700? You could do that shit on Amazon. Why are you paying for that? I'm partial to the CX5. I'm a big fan of the MX5. I love the Miata. If we're talking about M's and X's and R's and X's and C and X's, I'm going with the MX5, the Miata, Mazda Miata. Anyways, this is a big bottleneck. This is not a good bottleneck, and the only way they're going to solve it is by upscaling from 1080p. Wow, it's still a bottleneck. Not as big. No longer 17%. Only 15%. The best way to remove bottlenecks, I believe, is actually to raise. Is this? This should lower the bottleneck? Yeah, it's going to lower the bottleneck. See, now you see how it lowers the bottleneck the higher resolution you go? Now, the issue with this is, the problem is that if they're referring to upscaling and super sampling, then they don't believe that something in the system is good enough to actually render native 4K. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, speaking of, is that upscaling. There is a new kind of upscaling being developed by Sony. Sony is working on something called PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, and it's supposed to be some form of upscaling. I wish I could find it here. That works similar to DLSS or FSR, right? If they're using that as a way to mask some of the problems with keeping the same CPU, if they do, then it seems kind of unintuitive to sell a new box at a higher price. Now, I have to read this one part because, unfortunately, I don't see anywhere that they've talked about a CPU upgrade. But here, he says, overall, this is welcome, if not particularly surprising. The evolution of the PS5. We're about midway through the typical console life cycle, and it's time for a full hardware refresh with the PS5 Pro. The CPU upgrade with the original PS5 over the PS4 was massive, so Sony didn't really need another big CPU change. GPUs, on the other hand, are the heart of a gaming system, PC or otherwise, and putting the majority of upgrades into the graphics subsystem makes sense. I want to say that, for the most part, that's true. But if you've seen the way Ryzen 3000 series is starting to finally age, that's not good. Now, instead of being able to use this new box to progress the generation, this new box is going to hold back the generation, right? We'll have better graphics, but we won't have better frame rates. A lot of people that ended up buying a PS5 were kind of felt a little stung, a little burned by the fact that some games still run at 30 FPS. There's a lot of games that, no matter the strength of the GPU, are only going to be stable at 30 FPS. Now, that may change because of the upscaling and the frame generation, but those things introduce more input lag generally. I don't know how good PlayStation Super Resolution is. I haven't seen it, and I don't know anything about PlayStation frame generation if there is any. But I do know that the other two, the major players in the GPU manufacturing business, both have pretty good implementations of frame generation and upscaling. NVIDIA's being better, but FSR is getting a lot closer. I don't think that when it comes to input latency, they're great. I think adding more input delay on top of already low FPS games doesn't feel particularly good. And I think that that's even something that they mentioned with FSR 3.0 frame generation, or AMD Fluid Motion frames, whatever you would like to call it, and DLSS frame generation. They mentioned that if you don't have a base FPS of, I think they say 55 or 50, if you don't have a base FPS of 50 to 55 and up, then your game will feel worse attempting to add extra frames. So if a lot of PS5 games are already running at 30 FPS, how are you supposed to properly use more frame generation on them? Just a thought. The last thing to talk about with the PS5 Pro is the fact that the base PS5 Pro isn't going to come with the stand. That will be a $70 add-on, and won't come with the disk drive either. So you're looking at, if you buy a PS5 Pro, you are looking at a lot more money than if you just stuck with your original PS5, because $699 plus $69.99 for the stand, right? Or is it $70 for it's either 70 or 80. We'll say 70. We'll be generous. How much is the optical? Yeah, it's a little expensive, right? And then also, don't forget your disk drive if you want that too. So you're looking at, before taxes, something like $839. You could probably build a reasonably priced PC for $850. It won't compete with the amazing spec. I will say now, other than the CPU, the GPU uplift on this is amazing. The memory interface going up, the memory bandwidth going up, and the storage, all for $850 is a pretty good value. I'll be honest. But I think because of the fact that because of the fact that they didn't upgrade the CPU and they put that money into other places instead, it feels bottlenecked and lopsided. It feels the same way as the PS4 Pro, how the PS4 Pro could run certain games at 1440p and 4K or 1440p upscaled, right? But it couldn't actually run games at higher frame rates because they were still using the shitty fucking Jaguar cores in the original PS4. They didn't change that. The same thing with the Xbox One to the Xbox One S and X. They didn't change the CPU architecture. And I figured we would have learned our lessons from the generation past, but instead it looks like we're doing the same cycle, the same rigmarole that we've already done. Who do I think the PS5 Pro is for? At $700 or with everything all in, $850-ish before tax probably. Who do I think it's for? If you are a Sony fan, you've had a PS4 for a long time, you hadn't upgraded to the PS5 yet, I would recommend you just get the Pro because you'll have better graphics performance, you'll have double the RAM, you'll have Wi-Fi 7 instead of Wi-Fi 6, and I'm sorry, you will not have double the RAM, double the storage. I'm so sorry, you're still stuck on 16GB, which is not something that I recommend for gaming PCs, but graphics cards and all that, like, PCs are very different from consoles, thank goodness, right? Even though they're very close to x86, I don't recommend 16 gigs for a modern day PC, but I do recommend for a modern gaming PC, but I do think that the consoles work well with 16 gigabytes. They even work well with something as low as, I think, 12 gigabytes on the Xbox Series S. So you're getting a memory interface subsystem upgrade when it comes to the memory speed, the interface, and the bandwidth. You're getting a 2 terabyte SSD NVMe, probably still the same Gen 4 speeds or Gen 5 speeds, whatever it may be. Wi-Fi 7, gigabit internet is exactly the same, but now you have Wi-Fi 7, which is cool. And you're getting a significantly stronger GPU. If you're on a PS4, or you're on a Nintendo Switch, or you're on an older generation console, something like an Xbox One, and you feel it's time to upgrade, and you have the $700 to spend, the $850 to spend, and you want to stay in the console ecosystem, I probably recommend the PS5 Pro. If you're a PS5 player already, and you have a pretty nice collection of physical games, mainly, I'm going to say this mainly for the physical game collectors out there. Rest in peace to all the physical copies of Concord that will no longer work anymore. I don't recommend this, because now not only do you need to buy the optical drive for your purchase to be warranted, you probably also want to buy the vertical stand if the vertical stand on the PS5 base and Slim don't fit. I don't know if they do. I have no idea. They don't mention it here. If you're a new PlayStation ecosystem player or new to the newer generation, the current gen of PlayStation, maybe get the PS5 Pro. Especially if you're not worried about all that fancy schmancy disc shit. You're a zoomer. You've only ever downloaded games digitally. You had an Xbox One SAD. Xbox One S All Digital Edition for anyone who doesn't remember. You're probably fine. But if you have a physical collection, like physically collecting, and already have a PS5, I don't think that this is going to be truly a major upgrade. I don't care how much better the graphics look. You're not getting a significantly more... you're probably getting a significantly hampered experience by the CPU that's already in the PS5 in comparison to modern hardware. You could build a PC for $850 that has a modern CPU that will run circles around the Zen 2. I'm on PS1 still. It might be time for you to upgrade. I think you could build a modern PC that CPU-wise will run circles around the PS5 with something like a Ryzen 7 5700, 5800X3D, right? With something like a Ryzen 7 7700X, 7800X3D. And then you could get a basic graphics card for now. Something like an RX 6600, RX 6600 XT, RX 7600 XT, $330. And then in a few years, just upgrade the GPU, and the CPU will already be more powerful and won't hold you back as much as the CPU inside of a PS5 Pro and PS5 will. Apologies, said the wrong word. I'm glad that Sony is throwing their hat into the ring of the mid-gen refreshes, and we assume that the original PS5 was something along the lines of an RX 6700, right? 6700, 10 gigabyte. That was the closest thing we could go to. But it moving up a tier to this 7700 100 XT, 6800 XT is pretty good. But no CPU performance boost feels kind of shitty. Let me know how you guys feel about it down in the comment section down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Tell me all about how you feel about the PlayStation 5. If you plan on getting one, the new PlayStation 5 Pro. Plan on getting one if you've got no hat in the console race. If you're a Xbox Master Race fanboy, or if you're a PC guy just like me, leave it all in the comment section down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. This has been Beanie Thuggish talking about the PS5 Pro, how I feel about it, and who I think it's for. Signing out and saying peace.